All right, John, we're live. How are you doing?
Very good, Kayvon. Excited to get into this. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. I've been really looking forward to this discussion. John, let me just give say a few words about you, but I'd love to, to have you yourself introduce yourself a little bit more because I'm really curious, like how you got into Bitcoin, and the whole aspects of Bitcoin. So first of all, I mean, the initial reason and inspiration that I wanted to have this chat with you is this Twitter thread. Let me just share the screen here so everyone can see this. It starts off with a false narrative going around the Bitcoin community. It's about the tech productivity driven deflation is incompatible with indebted governments because they want and need inflation. And then you go on, very structured. So this is the initial reason. And your background is really fascinating. So you're the managing director of private client services at Swan Bitcoin. For how long, John?
Almost 2 years now. I joined Swan at the beginning
Oh,
of
wow.
2022.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
But you had previously spent 13 years on Wall Street, where you were a portfolio manager and asset manager, also, can I call it, an institutional investor at Goldman Sachs?
exactly. Yeah, there's a lot of different, as Wall Street does, there's many different terms that mean the same thing, but investment management, portfolio management, institutional investing, the buy side, all kind of refers to the same thing.
Fascinating. So I managed to read your articles. It was a little bit short term, but I managed to read your both articles. Fascinating, written, especially for beginners, noobs, or anybody who questions the whole so-called legacy. It sounds like an understatement, but this whole legacy system. But I would urge and really recommend your articles. How Legacy Finance Perceives Bitcoin: Observations from a 13-year career at Goldman Sachs. And the other one, Fixed Supply Money Does Not Lead to Economic Collapse, and why it is in fact the only intellectually and ethically defensible monetary system. Okay, it's your stage, John. First of all, I'm really curious, what was the inspiration? What was the aha moment, the vision, the mission within you when you got or what was the first touching moments with Bitcoin?
Yeah, so for me, it was sound money before it was Bitcoin. And the real first trigger was the financial crisis. So for me, a huge piece of the story is that I was a college senior in 2008 and 2009. That was a very interesting time to be graduating really in anything, but I had a degree in finance. So to be graduating in 2008, 2009 as a finance major, you're trying to get jobs at Wall Street banks. And I can literally remember some of them from their, HR type departments coming to our campus and saying, "Hey, we're here because it's our job to come to this career fair, but we actually have no jobs to offer any of you right now." And we're just like, okay, I'm not sure what to do about that. And they were wondering, they didn't know if they were going to have a job next month. They didn't know if their bank was going to be around next month. So it was just a really interesting time for a lot of reasons. But one of those reasons was just that there was this massive financial crisis that happened. And it's just objectively true that the people who were tasked with managing our economic system, whether it's people at the Fed, whether it's the Treasury Secretary, or just politicians in general, even CEOs of banks, really none of them saw it coming. We could just say that that's true in hindsight. And I don't mean to say that as if I was a 20-year-old college kid and that I saw it coming. I certainly did not. But I was able to see that these people who you think are supposed to see it coming were unable to see it coming. So that for me was like the first trigger, first light bulb moment that I said, okay, I've got to look elsewhere. And I have to unfortunately put my college professors in that same bucket. None of them were really able to see it coming. None of them were even able to explain it as it was happening. So for me, that just meant, okay, I'm going to look elsewhere for answers. And I somehow came across the Mises Institute, Mises.org. That's Mises for anyone who's unfamiliar with that. It's named after Ludwig von Mises, one of the great Austrian economists. And that was my first introduction to Austrian economics. So many things happened from there. Firstly, I said, why have I never even heard of this thing called Austrian economics?
Same question. Wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, I was a finance major. So I took finance classes, I took economics classes, and it's my senior year. So I'm almost done with college, and I've never even heard of Austrian economics. I'd never even heard the term sound money. To the extent that we talked about the gold standard at all in my classes, it was like a passing paragraph where they said, oh, the gold standard is really bad because it doesn't provide you with flexibility to manage your monetary system. And they just like move on, and they're like, thank goodness we don't have the gold standard anymore. But there's so much more to it than that. And Mises.org provides that. It so many good articles, PDF books, also actually a forum where you could have discussions with people. And back in like 2009, 2010, that was kind of a big deal because Twitter was not what it is today. YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Reddit, those things really didn't exist the way they do today. So I spent so much time in that forum, reading articles, reading books. And for me, it actually made sense. So timeline wise, speeding this up a bit, first it was sound money for me, but that meant gold. I was one of these people that believed, the answer is to go back on a gold standard. And it wasn't until 2013 that I first heard of Bitcoin. And I heard it from a friend. And the interesting thing about my story is that I immediately said, wow, this is interesting because they're trying to do digital sound money.
Really? Because then you're the opposite of Sailor, who just dismissed it as like, just casino, whatever, speculation, gambling money, right? I mean, something like that. Interesting.
Yeah. So I do have an interesting story in that sense. Now, I wish my next thought was, this is great. I'm going to get involved. I'm going to learn more about it. Unfortunately, my next thought was, okay, they're trying to do digital sound money, but that will never catch on. And my thought was just that, gold has this history of being money for literally thousands of years. It's physical, it's tangible. People are just not going to buy the internet version of gold. So I said, nice idea. It's not going to work. And then I do have to say, at the time, I didn't know. It's not as if I understood, how Bitcoin works. They said there's 21 million. I thought, how do I know there's 21 million? How do I go buy some? I heard of these Bitcoin ATMs. What am I going to do? Just put, $100 bills in it. And what if somebody's staking out the machine? And there was so much friction to it at the time. So I just said, I don't even think it's going to catch on, but it's also very confusing. So I'm not going to do it. And it took me 4 years until 2017. It's late 2017, so maybe even like 5 years.
It's unbelievable parallels. But you know what? I mean, to be honest with me, how many so-called OGs or old, like geniuses, who are totally, intellectually and cognitively, like who could have, understood the technological aspect, monetary, just dismissed it at first. And you hear all those stories from a lot of, prominent Bitcoiners, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think that everyone's story is, unique, but there is a lot of overlap. And I think one of the huge things of overlap is that it's actually very rare to hear someone who heard of Bitcoin for the first time and immediately was like, oh, that's going to be so significant. And I understand it and I want to get involved right now. Usually it's healthy skepticism for a long time. And I think that's probably good. You want people to build up that conviction. It's hard to just hear about something and immediately have conviction in it, 10 minutes later. So I think that's kind of normal. But then I'll just like speed up the rest of this. Basically, 2017 happens. I think that's like the first mainstream bull run in Bitcoin. There's obviously have been cycles throughout Bitcoin's whole history, but 2017, I was working at Goldman at the time. My colleagues were talking about it. Banks, CEOs were talking about it, mostly negatively, but they were still talking about it. CNBC's talking about it. Bloomberg's talking about it. So I said, okay, maybe this is a real thing. I'm going to start to learn more about it. I'm going to get involved. Um, and then I don't know if this was the case for you, but I probably got too bullish because my thought was like, okay, Bitcoin is here. Everyone understands sound money now. They're going to get this. And then it was like, bottom falls out of the bull market. People think Bitcoin is dead again. There was the whole fork wars thing. Which one's the real Bitcoin? And that was like kind of a confusing thing to navigate. So it certainly it wasn't like, oh, Bitcoin's here now and everything's easy. So there was like kind of a lot of learning that I've had to do, and I'm obviously still learning every single day about it. But that's kind of my story. And then in terms of the career side, in 2017, there weren't very obvious places to go work. Um, I'm not a tech software developer coder, so I wasn't going to go build something. I did have a few people that left Wall Street to go start a crypto hedge fund type of thing around 17, 18, and had conversations with them. But I'm glad that I had the economic background, because to me, Bitcoin was always meant to be money. It's not meant to be this portfolio that you hold 75 different tokens and you trade the ups and downs. That's just not what Bitcoin is. That's like a misunderstanding of what Bitcoin and crypto generally is. So I'm glad I passed on that. And then as 2020 came around, 2021, started hearing about companies, whether it's like Swan or NYDIG or others. And I said, you know what? I think my background actually is compatible with what these companies are looking to do. And then I got linked up with some people at Swan, met, CEO Corey, met people like Stephen Luca and others, just became very impressed with what they were building. And I said, you know what, I think it makes sense for me to take the leap from Wall Street to Swan. And then, like I said, I've been at Swan for coming up on 2 years.
Awesome. I was just been thinking, I mean, we both know, Bitcoin is, especially when after thousands of hours of listening to podcasts, reading books, articles, and this and that, going deeper, it's a very multifaceted rabbit hole, right? But I always tell people when we do like presentations, for newbies, here in Austria, I tell them, you don't need to understand. I mean, do you know how the internet works? Do you know how your engine, your car engine works, your TV works? Not really, right? You understand the principles, right? And that's what it takes. You need to understand the principles, the essence, the fundamental principles of Bitcoin. Like, for example, the absolute scarcity, the immutable absolute scarcity of Bitcoin. If just that one parameter, or that's the main factor actually, is I had some other thoughts, but why don't you go on? Just go on. I have some other questions in my background, but in my brain. Go ahead. Why don't we? Because you sent me a list of subtopics that you wanted to talk about. Of course, I want to talk about deflation technology because for very specific reasons. I want to know your take because I see such huge potential for humanity and civilization, especially when the time is running out. We need to accelerate a little bit this process, but I have my very fundamental scientific and realistic and factual based reasons why we need to accelerate this process. But why don't you start talking about the subtopics you want to talk about, and then we'll just smoothly, glide into the most important topic. I think that's the technological monetary deflation, or as Jeff Booth calls it, the key to an abundant future, right?
Yes. Would love to. I'll try to hit on some of these and then we can dig in if you want. And then, like you said, we can talk about that technology deflation versus monetary deflation and what governments want and that whole topic, because I do believe it's very interesting. So I would say one of the things that I probably have the most experience and ability to speak on is just what is it like to work on Wall Street? What are those people like, from your average person all the way up to a very high level person within Wall Street? What are the strengths and weaknesses of Wall Street? What are their blind spots? How do they think about Bitcoin? Because I left Wall Street at the beginning of 2022. So I actually was having conversations with people about gold, sound money, Bitcoin for years, going back even before 2017. And to be fair, it's not as if these were topics that came up every day, but these are people you work with for 10, 12, or sometimes more hours a day. And sometimes economic conversations would come up. And for myself, going back to 2010, I was this Austrian economics proponent, gold standard, sound money. So I would always, put that out there and see what people thought about it. So I actually have many, many data points to see what people think and how they respond.
But hey, good for you. You planted so many seeds. You don't even know, what's going to come out of it in a year or two. I'm sorry to interrupt. Sorry.
No, that's true. And on that topic of planting seeds, LinkedIn, as we all know, is a place where people from Wall Street and corporate America spend a lot more time than Twitter, generally speaking. Whereas the Bitcoin community, Twitter, and like a little bit of LinkedIn and other things, but it's like main place is Twitter. I have had a few people from my past career, former coworkers because I'll post on LinkedIn every once in a while. And some of them have said like, oh, hey, I see these things you're saying about Bitcoin. Like, that's a good point. Like it's a seed, to be fair. It's far from being a tree, but you got to start somewhere. So on that point, the analogy I would give for people who work on Wall Street is people who mainstream medicine, people who work in the healthcare industry, and their thoughts on nutrition is actually very similar to people who work on Wall Street and their thoughts on money and economics. And what I mean by that is, unfortunately, most people who work in medicine and healthcare, nutrition is not a focus for them. They might pretend that they know something about it, but they're really just regurgitating things that they've heard elsewhere. And unfortunately, those things they're regurgitating are really not based on good reasoning, good data, good evidence. And the same is kind of true for Wall Street and money and economics. And if I were going to defend them a little bit, I would say the reason is that at these big Wall Street banks, you get hired, you're kind of like a cog in a wheel. You're doing this very specific thing, and you might get very, very good at it. But that doesn't mean you're going to understand the whole picture. And it's kind of the same thing with people in medicine and healthcare. You might be hired as a doctor or a nurse, and you do this very specific thing, and you might be great at it. But that doesn't mean you have a good understanding of optimal human nutrition and sleep and circadian rhythm. So we kind of have to remember that, because we fall into this trap where we just think, oh, he or she works on Wall Street. They must understand everything about money because Wall Street has to do with money. Oh, they're a doctor, they're a nurse, they must know everything about nutrition. And it's just not true. And if anything, unfortunately, the opposite has been true. The mainstream beliefs about money and economics, just like with nutrition, have unfortunately been incorrect. So that's the main thing I would say about talking to someone about money and economics on Wall Street. They're not even that well versed in like Keynesian or MMT economics. They take more of an ambivalent approach. They're kind of just like, hey, I don't spend my time doing that because what's the point? I got hired to do this thing at Goldman Sachs and I can make a good career. And it's not malicious either. Some of them just want to do their career and go home and spend time with their families. They don't even want to debate whether the Federal Reserve should exist or not. So that was a big takeaway for me. And there's more we can get into there, but that kind of is like a short summary of that first article about legacy finance perceiving Bitcoin.
Fantastic overview. And I mean, of course, and first of all, I heard that from someone, I think it was a nuclear engineer. He said the problem is with people, in the mainstream science, or specific fields, and the more titles. I mean, I have myself a PhD in law. And I've seen people, especially when you go into the academic process, the intellectual process, your worldview, what do you call it, bandwidth, scope, it's like a funnel, but it goes like, it becomes narrower and narrower, the more titles and PhDs you have, it seems like, no, it doesn't seem, it's actually factually, you meet people that have like, common sense, who have no titles, who have no whatever academic titles, and they're much smarter, clever, open-minded, and more curious. I mean, just look at Joe Rogan. I mean, he's a wonderful, podcaster, but at least, he's open-minded. He asks questions. He questions, the reality around. But this is our problem. To be honest with you, I woke up, pretty late, I would say, on a lot of topics. I went into a lot of rabbit holes, whether it be, myself as an ex-smoker, into internal documents of the tobacco industry, and then wrote my PhD about it. But anyway, it's not about me. I'm just saying, it's like this natural bias and prejudice that I guess, people in your past, like Goldman Sachs people develop, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, you made me think of a bunch of things there. One of which is, and I wrote this in the article, and I think it is important because you don't want people to get trapped at the other end of the spectrum, which is, hey, let's not believe what any expert, any specialist has to say, because now I believe the experts are all wrong and the specialists are all wrong. That would be too extreme as well. You don't want to just have a blind rule that says, I don't trust the experts anymore. So just like, that's important to say. But at the same time, you have to acknowledge that whether it's the food pyramid, whether it's the idea that you should eat high carb, low fat, saturated fats will clog your arteries, eat 6 servings of carbs per day. All these things have led to chronic diseases, and seed oils. I know that's become kind of a meme in the Bitcoin community, but these are the things that mainstream medicine was pushing. And I think it's just objectively true now that it was wrong. You look at the same thing with economics, and Fed chairs consistently don't know what is going to happen in the economy. Whether it's Ben Bernanke going into 2008, he has like a dozen quotes that just he makes the quote, and then you wait anywhere from like a week to a few months later, and the exact opposite happens. And then you have Yellen and Powell with inflation is transitory. It just keeps happening over and over and over again. So I just put that out there because if these experts actually had a good track record, then I would have no problem listening to them. But you just can't look at the last, and for me, it's the last like 20 years just because of my age, but I'm sure it's been going on longer than that. But at least in the last 20 years, you can't ignore the fact that these experts have been wrong about some of the most critical things, especially when it comes to, again, healthcare, nutrition, and money and economics.
Wow.
So from there, I'd be happy. What the second article was kind of like an expansion of the first one, because one of the key things that you'll hear from people on Wall Street about money and economics, they repeat this phrase, which is, well, if the economy is growing, then you need more units of money. And that, I think, is one of the biggest false narrative. We started our chat talking about a false narrative about the tech deflation thing. And to be fair, that's like a fairly nuanced point that I think it's important, but it's like very nuanced. The false narrative about we need more units of money to achieve more economic growth, that is like the elephant in the room. Like that is the narrative that underpins so much of Keynesian economics, MMT, even free bankers, who are like, free bankers are not that far away from Austrians and Bitcoiners, but even they believe that you need more money to achieve more economic growth. So that was the point of the second article I wrote. I really just wanted to like pick it apart and show why it's not true. So we could get into that one, but I think that one's pretty critical because, like I said, pretty much every school of economic thought, other than the Austrians, believes that to some extent.
Yeah, and I think the system, let's just call it, has done a tremendous job, like brainwashing people. Like, like we need inflation, like whatever, because of price stability, like the 2%, but deflation is evil. I mean, this indoctrination dogma, I mean, they've done a tremendous job doing, brainwashing us,
Absolutely. You hear it everywhere from the first time you take an economics class in high school, you hear it in college, you hear it repeated in the financial media, politicians repeat it. The central bank repeats it. They do studies that, claim to support it. And so you just hear it everywhere. But I would argue that upon actually inspecting it, it's really not true. So I tried to pick apart 6 different beliefs that these people who you could call it expansionary money and credit is maybe the way the terminology to use. These proponents of expansionary money and credit, they typically say things like you need it for more economic growth. They say things like if prices decline, everyone will hoard everything and economic growth will just grind to a halt. And then they also say that it's unfair for purchasing power to be maintained over time because they say, hey, you did nothing. You just, had your money under a mattress and then you got to buy more with it 10 years later. That's not fair. They claim that. And then fourthly, they say, and this one's not everyone, but some of them claim this, that you need to create more money in order to redistribute resources within society. And then fifthly, it's five, that we need expansionary money and credit to stimulate. And I put stimulate in quotes because I think that is giving themselves way too much credit. They believe it's stimulative during times of recession. So in the article, I tried to go through each of these points to show why I don't think any of them are true. But I did my best to steel man the argument because those are the 5 points that I have heard repeated over and over and over again. So that was kind of the gist of that article.
Awesome. Yeah. Do you want to elaborate a little bit on the other article too, a little bit, or are we done with the overall your general thesis?
Yeah, I would encourage people to check out the article because it is a little bit dense of a topic. I tried to put it in layman's terms. Maybe there's a couple things I could call out from it. There is this difference between something that the Austrians call circulation credit versus commodity credit. So you might often hear someone critique the Austrians and say, "Oh, you Austrians," and not Austrians like you. Is everyone an Austrian economist by you? That must be fantastic.
I wish it was. Yeah, I wish it was.
Yeah.
I think you do know Rahim Tariq. He's been on a couple of conferences now. He's actually half Persian, but I'm a full Persian, but he's half Persian. I think he used to be a nuclear engineer. He's a super brain, Rahim Tariq. But he's got the School of Austrian Economics. I mean, he is of Scholarium, I think it's called. So maybe you should give it a listen. I think he just did a podcast interview with Robert Breedlove, a very intense, deep. I mean, it's too intellectual for me, too theoretical and philosophical. But he's one of the, because he lives in Austria. He's an Austrian, so that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. No, thanks for flagging that. I would like to check that out.
Yeah, I'll send it to you.
Yeah, please do. And so one of these critiques that people throw at anyone from the Austrian School of Economics, they might say, "Oh, you guys are anti-credit. You think that there should be no credit," and it's not quite true. Austrians are fine with credit. We just don't believe that you should pair credit with money being created out of thin air, and that's the difference between commodity credit or circulation credit. It's easier to explain on a gold standard with a commodity money because you just say, there's actually with Bitcoin, it's fairly easy to explain too. But let's just say you have 100 ounces of gold that exist in the world. You can only one person can have that gold at a time. And if I decide, hey, I'm going to lend Kayvon 1 ounce of gold, it left my custody, it went to your custody. There's still 100 ounces of gold. That's commodity credit. That's perfectly fine. It doesn't change the money supply. Circulation credit is something different. It's when you have 100 ounces of gold and now I'm a bank, and instead of giving you 1 ounce of gold, I give you a piece of paper that says this is 1 ounce of gold. So now you have money of 100 ounces of gold plus this one piece of paper that's redeemable for 1 ounce of gold. You now have 101 ounces of gold in the system. You've inflated the money supply, and the Austrians believe that this causes economic distortions. I would argue that it is also a transfer of wealth because the bank didn't have to earn the money in order to lend it. I think that's actually a fundamental principle that's being violated. In order to lend something, you had to earn it first.
Yeah, and this is where the Cantillon effect starts, or right? I mean, like,
I think this is related to the
mhm.
Cantillon effect for sure. Yeah, I think
Maybe you
there's
can just
different ways.
explain it in your own words. What's the Cantillon? Because you're probably better at it.
Yeah, I think it can take different shapes and forms, but it essentially is when you create money out of thin air. Um, we have to remember that money is not a consumable good. We don't, no one actually wants money for the sake of money. We just want money for what it can eventually buy us. Everyone kind of, knows that, but money is incredibly valuable for its medium of exchange purposes. So the fact that when you create money out of thin air, you haven't actually created more real resources in society to be used, to be consumed. So if you create more money out of thin air, someone is going to benefit, but it's just the person who gets to use that money for their own purposes. But because you haven't created more resources, it's not a win-win situation. If I just work very hard to create a car, and you work very very hard to create a house, and I build two cars, you build two houses, and then we say, okay, great, I'll give you a car, you give me a house. That's a win-win. We just built something and then we traded it. So there's more resources. It's a win-win. If you just create money out of thin air, you haven't actually created more houses, more cars, more anything. So if you just create the money and then someone gets to use it to go out in society to buy something, they're simply gaining at the expense of everyone else. And the Cantillon effect, I've heard it pronounced many different ways. I call it the
Yeah,
Cantillon effect.
was it
But
French? The guy Cantillon or something?
yeah. So maybe I need to throw an accent on there. But yeah, so the Cantillon effect basically says that the people who are closest to the money creation benefit the most. But again, it's not that there's nothing wrong with benefiting, meaning growing the economic pie with new production. That's a win-win. The Cantillon effect is a zero-sum game. When you create money, someone is benefiting at the expense of someone else. So unfortunately, that's unfortunately what happens with when you have money created out of thin air. That's just objectively true.
John, I mean, let's just call it what it is. And you've heard it probably from other Bitcoiners or thinkers too. We got to articulate it. It's systemic theft, legalized
Yeah.
systemic theft, inherently, systematically. This is what's so, I mean, it's a hard, bitter pill to swallow for a lot of people. But understanding, this, the whole, whatever we would call it, fractional reserve banking, circulation credit, the whole central banking fiat system is one gigantic, systemic theft and beyond fraud. And
yeah. And one thing that I like to pose to friends or contacts who they're really not into Bitcoin. So you can't like push too hard and start explaining Bitcoin to them. And this is how mining works. And this is how, it's
put on the safety gloves.
yeah. You have to, really just like throw little bits of information at them. One thing I like to do to get people thinking is just ask them the question, hey, why is counterfeiting money illegal? And I like to have them answer it, because I think if like I don't want them to pause and me start answering it, because I know you and I are aligned on this question, but what the hope is that they start saying, well, yeah, when you create new money, you're basically just stealing from everyone else. That's the reason why counterfeiting is illegal.
Excellent
So
question. Excellent.
you have to now admit that, and the cop out here is, well, we give the government and the banking system the ability to do it because we think they're going to do it for the right reason, and like you do all these mental gymnastics. But at the end of the day, it's still taking resources from other people. Even if you believe it's okay that the banking system does it, it's still happening.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think, I mean, of course, I've stumbled upon this question over and over again, but it's actually a very simple question, like why is counterfeiting seriously? Yeah, why is counterfeiting illegal and yeah, punishable by? I mean, they come after you with the whole Secret Service, right? I mean, and the whole intelligence complex going to come after you. So anyway, yeah, it's an excellent question. Yeah, I should internalize that. Yeah, good question.
Yeah. And if you're thinking about counterfeiting money and they come after you, just tell them, hey, I was just stimulating the economy. Don't come after me here.
Okay, John, let's talk about, this is a fundamentally important question, this technological monetary deflation. I'm a huge fan, of course, of Jeff Booth and read his book so many times and given it and recommended it. I orange pilled my wife's brother totally, for a couple of years now. I've totally orange pilled him. And especially with Jeff Booth's book, and now he's writing his own master thesis on deflation and real estate. I don't know the exact working title, but I can let's stay in touch because he's going to be actually in March in what is it called in this conference in Madeira. So he's going to talk with
Bitcoin Atlantis, is it?
Yeah. He's going to go there with his whole family. Unfortunately, we can't even afford it right now. But it's going to be amazing because he needs to talk directly to Jeff Booth, and I'm going to introduce him sort of via chat or something. Anyway, let's talk about would you know why I'm so fascinated by technological monetary deflation?
I can guess, but I would love for you to elaborate on it.
Okay. I mean, I'm a huge advocate of technological innovation. And I'm sure you've read Safed and Amus's book, with the Bitcoin standard. So there's this La Belle Epoque, where they talk about the gold standard, which you mentioned several times and emphasized the gold standard. And now the thing is, we never lived. I mean, our past generations, we never lived through those La Belle Epoque, those gold standard times, where they, as Safed says, the original, what I think it's called, original inventions. A lot of innovation, technological innovations, inventions have been created and developed during this time. When was that? Like 1850?
Yeah. It was like a little bit after the Civil War in the US. So like that ended around 1865. And then I think it took some time for the US to get out of that. But then we had what Americans would typically refer to as the Gilded Age, similar to, golden epoch, very similar. But then I would argue that ended in 1913 with the start of the Federal Reserve and World War I, but it was like a 30-year period.
This is where the decoupling of the gold, right, already started, not in 1971 Correct.
Mm-hmm. No, I would say 1971 was like the final removal of the gold peg, but it certainly starts in 1913.
Exactly, yeah. So thank you. Yeah, thank you for that. So I had Jeff Booth, several times on my show, and I read his book so many times, and he's a great thinker. He really questions the whole system, and he actually recently said, I don't know, maybe I'm bad at explaining things because I keep repeating myself. Like, get up the system. It's really, this is what I meant, with the indoctrination and the dogma and the brainwashing and this whole narrative. That's like we're really so brainwashed, so we cannot even think. It's really hard. I mean, maybe we can now, as because we are so deep in multifaceted rabbit hole. But to make it short, the potential of a monetary technology, especially monetary with Bitcoin, like when you have Bitcoin with the absolute immutable scarcity, and once hopefully we have sort of a Bitcoin standard or hyper Bitcoinization phase process, then that is when we see and we think in terms of purchasing power. This is where we see, prices, going lower and lower and lower. And people are going to start, entrepreneurs and inventors, engineers, scientists, technologists are going to start within that hyper Bitcoinized world, for the first time, in a truly free market environment, start, thinking, designing, developing, trial and error. And then hopefully, I'm a huge enemy of the patent system. I think it's a huge criminal theft system, but it's a chapter by itself. But the potential for new technological innovation, and I'm not talking about people are, like talking too much about AI in digital. And no, I'm talking about like energy, transportation, propulsion technology, anything, any technology that will help, humanity thrive, right? With it, with it, I mean, we should be by now, traveling the stars, but we've been stolen at least 100 years, not only of monetary innovation, but technological innovation. With it be, starting with Nikola Tesla and things like that. So, do you understand where I'm going with this? So, this is why I wanted to have your take, your opinion, your vision, your mission. Like, do we have time? I mean, do we need to accelerate maybe even this process? Because with everything going on geopolitically, macroeconomically, maybe even, micronova, who knows, if that micronova gets solar shot because the magnetic field of the earth is being reduced every year by at least 5%. And that is going down like an S-curve downwards, scientifically, proven, right? So what do we do, when we don't have the information and communication systems anymore? Because this is going to be destroyed, right? So how much time do we have to enjoy, or as humanity enjoy the process of hyper-Bitcoinization? I know it's a huge, unimaginable, what do you call it, pill to swallow or to process, to think about, because you need to really go into every rabbit hole. But yeah, I wanted to have your sort of bird's overview over
Yeah,
this.
yeah, it's a big topic. And the way I describe my thoughts on it is that I am very confident that sound money is going to bring about better systems of course, economics and trade, but it goes far further than that. I think it's going to bring about better systems of healthcare, education, energy, government, science, art, architecture, probably more, but that covers a lot of life right there. And someone who has not really spent any time learning about Bitcoin or Austrian economics, they probably might hear what I just said, and they would say, that guy's crazy. Why does he think that, fixing the money can fix all these problems? And I really do believe it is logical, because money is this thing that coordinates all of human activity. That is just true. And unless the only exception to that really is if you're going to go and live a hunter-gatherer lifestyle, don't use money, don't specialize, truly live off the land. You can't buy anything from anyone. That's fine. That was a long part of human existence as we understand it, but I don't think most people want to go back to that. So if you're going to live in this world where we trade, where we specialize, get very good at producing, and then sell and buy things with other people, money is involved. And if you corrupt the money, I think you corrupt every industry, every system in our society. And to your point, there is probably this balance of, you want to fix the money and fix all these systems before the system collapses from some sort of event. So yeah, there is kind of a balance there.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's going to happen in the next few months or years, but there is a realistic scenario where 2040s, 2050s, this process, these really natural, no conspiracies and nothing, it's just natural Earth disaster cycles. There are different layered, right? So I'm just as an individual, and as someone, with a child, we have a daughter, 3 years old. I mean, thinking the only mission, my mission is our daughter, right? Mm-hmm. So what kind of future is she going to have? It's not about me or my wife, it's about like our daughter, right? Do you have children, John? You know what I'm saying? It's like the whole mindset totally changes.
Yes. And I think this gets into time preference, that Bitcoiners, whether they have children or not, generally speaking, are much more focused on the future, meaning they have a low time preference. High time preference would mean you want something immediate gratification type of thing. And yeah, I think whenever someone has children, it just lowers their time preference even more, because they're starting to think about the next generation and the next, and grandkids and great grandkids. And I know it's a cliche, we all want to leave the world a better place. What I think Bitcoiners have discovered, that much of the world has not yet discovered is actually that improving our monetary system is probably the number one way you can leave the world a better place.
Yeah.
I know it. Again, I'm laughing because I know that so many of my friends would think I'm crazy for saying that because they're not really into Bitcoin, but I believe it with every fiber of my body.
I even think, I mean, it sounds a little bit esoteric, but I think even I don't know what to call it, but let's just call it the spiritual, psychological, behavioral, emotional, our human interaction would by orders of magnitude, I mean, totally improve and transform, to be honest with you. This is what I'm totally, I mean, I know it deep in my heart and soul, I know, but the thing is, okay, what do you think? Let me ask you this. What do you think would be the triggering points or I know it's phases, but as with technology, it exponentially accelerates, whether it be, mobile phones or digital technology. Sailor, loves to talk about this, the exponential S curvature. Like what would need to happen, or what kind of critical mass would we need, because we don't need the whole humanity. What we need maybe is 3%, 5% of Earth's population, adopting it, using it, and then all of a sudden, it just goes like, it just accelerates by orders of magnitude.
Yeah. And I think something that's informative here is new adoption curves of technology. I think that is just the reality that, not everyone adopted the internet overnight. Not everyone adopted having a cell phone overnight. There's it's in business school textbooks, but it's like the early adopters and then, the mainstream people and the late adopters. And there's probably some other groups in there, but that's kind of the gist of it. And I think Bitcoin, that largely applies to Bitcoin with one exception, because Bitcoin is a monetary asset. So the adoption curve of this is actually an interesting topic, but it's a little tricky to explain because let's take like Amazon, the company Amazon. Amazon's adoption probably just kept going up and up and up over time, going all the way back to the late 90s. But if you look at Amazon's stock price, it crashed by like 90%.
Oh my, yeah. When was it, like 2000? When was that approximately? When 2000 something, or no?
It was 2001 because it coincided with the 9/11 and the market sell-off were like closely connected. Yeah. So Amazon fell by over 90% from its high before 2001 to its low in 2001. It's not as if people just stopped using Amazon. It was just that the valuation and the price got out of line with reality. So you have to always know if you're talking about something, adoption in terms of price or adoption in terms of like users and the network and the platform. So I think, and Bitcoin's pretty similar here. If you look from 2020 to now, I think Bitcoin users has just gone up. The ease of use, like platforms for acquiring it, platforms for holding it, devices for holding it, it's all just gotten easier. More merchants accept it now than they did 3 years ago. But that doesn't mean the price just goes up in a straight line. The price is different. There's just other inputs that go into the price. And I think it's just natural for the price to be more volatile, whereas the underlying adoption can be steadily building underneath it.
What about nation state adopter? Like, for example, like, I mean, it could happen. Like if Milei in Argentina, I mean, he is a total free, market, Austrian economist actually, right? I mean, what if Argentina, becomes a, semi, or I don't know, no, exactly, actually, like the model, following the model of El Salvador, with dollar and Bitcoin sort of a standard. What do you think happen?
I put this in
accelerate that, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I put this in the category of any individual event. You can kind of look at it in isolation and maybe say, oh, it's not that big of a deal. Now, granted, if Argentina truly makes Bitcoin legal tender, I think you have to call that a big deal. But, it was very easy for a Bitcoin naysayer to go, oh, it's El Salvador. It's like 5 million people or however many it is. And, who cares? And they just like, downplay it. It's pretty easy for them to do that. But at the same time, if you rewound the clock to 10 years ago and you would say, hey, Bitcoin is going to be legal tender in 2021 in any country in the world, people would have said, oh, wow, that's a big deal. And just the fact that it's being talked about as potentially being legal tender in another country, I think it's a big deal. And I would also relate this to how the narrative has shifted on Wall Street, which was in 2017. You have Jamie Dimon. He's famous for saying, I'll fire anybody who buys Bitcoin. It's a scam. It's a Ponzi scheme. And now you have BlackRock trying to create an ETF. And Wall Street still critiques Bitcoin, but their critiques today are things like, oh, it's volatile. Oh, it's just correlated with tech stocks. And my point would be, okay, let's take those two things. 6 years ago, they said it's a scam and a Ponzi scheme. Now today they're telling you it's volatile and correlated with tech stocks. They clearly have come a long way in accepting it. They're still criticizing it, but they're much closer to accepting it. So I think you have to zoom out and see what these people are actually doing, whether it's banks or nation states. And to me, the trend seems pretty clear. It's one of increased adoption, but it doesn't happen all at once. It kind of has to happen one event at a time.
Exactly. And you remember like 6-7 years ago, yeah, there were, thinkers like you or like whatever, like Parker Lewis, gradual and suddenly, I mean, these people, who really come from within, like yourself, from the legacy, they know exactly how the system, how they think. But now, I mean, we have an arsenal of counter arguments of factual, like, tick, 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 you can just disarm them, immediately. I mean, there's so much material, I mean, out there, and it's being talked about. Now we even have Bitcoin, it's on mainstream channels or broad, right? I mean, it's evolved tremendously.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a great point. It's not as if, Bitcoin's price is just the tip of the iceberg.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's so much content underneath it, whether it's cryptography, computer science, whether it's economics, monetary history, energy usage and energy markets, geopolitics, privacy, human rights. So it's not as if we're all, and this to me is a big actually Bitcoin versus crypto thing, where Bitcoin's price, obviously price is important. It shows market cap, it shows adoption. It does need to grow over time. But that's not the only thing that's going on here. There's so much content under the surface. And I think that's a huge differentiating point between these other cryptos where it's really all about the price. It's just someone says, look, I bought in here and it went up 4x and it's great. It's like, yeah, but there's not really like a narrative there about how it's going to improve society or how all these things you can learn about it or these brilliant articles written about it, which that is the case with Bitcoin. So I think it's just a matter of time that more people will see that.
And it's a psychological, emotional trigger, of course, because recently we did some presentations and we invited people, but because the price was still low, it wasn't before this bull run or whatever you want to call it, and so not so many people came, and we were like, it was like comments and it's like, okay, it's once the price goes up again, we don't even need to do any like advertising or marketing or whatever, or like announce it. Like people are just going to come by themselves, right? So this is a sort of a psychological trigger, but unfortunately, because there's just a huge lack of comprehension.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, I think it is just human nature, like you said. It unfortunately, but it's just true that the price going up does bring people in. And I saw this firsthand because when I was on Wall Street from 2020, 21, and the beginning of 2022, as the price was going up, more people on Wall Street wanted to hear about Bitcoin. Like it really was drawing them in. And then when the price fell in 2022, they were like, I'm out. I don't want to touch this anymore. And you and I know that's the exact opposite of what you're supposed to do. They literally want to buy as it's going up. And then when it goes down, they don't want to buy. But I think we just have to chalk it up to human nature.
Yeah, I mean, and I hate to always say, I told you so. I mean, I'm not that type of guy, but I mean, we've been planting so many seeds, and you also, so many people. I mean, we've been planting seeds, but sometimes it just takes time. Some people need 3 months, sometimes some people need 1 year, 3 years. or or specific like things happening. Right?
Yeah.
So before we wrap up, John, I wanted to take like a zoom out. Like, do you see anything like whatever we could talk about just for a few minutes, maybe about the bond market? What do you think? I mean, the whole, I don't know, anything that's like really perverted at the moment. Would it be? I don't know. Do you have a opinion on the bond market? Like, could it crash? Like,
Yeah, my general thought on that is I think the investing regime that we've had for the past 30 something years in financial markets is changing, and it already has changed in the sense that major things that would characterize the past 30 years, it would be things like low inflation, falling interest rates, increasing globalization. That means, cheap stuff from China. That means cheap natural gas from Russia, friendly relations, generally speaking, between the East and the West, supply chains being built for efficiency instead of resilience, no really major conflicts between world powers, US dollars and treasuries being the primary global reserve asset, and then mostly positive returns in stocks and bonds. That kind of characterizes the last like 30 something years. And, to anyone listening, they probably are noticing that most or all of those trends in the last 2 years have started to change. We're seeing the highest inflation since the 80s. We've never, like, the pace of interest rate increases is the fastest, maybe all time, but we're seeing interest rates we haven't seen since pre-financial crisis. Obviously, globalization is going in reverse a little bit. There's this concept of reshoring happening where countries are realizing, okay, we can't be entirely reliant on having that factory that's in China or anywhere else. There's more conflicts. Just, unfortunately, it is just true. The reshoring thing, again, kind of the same thing, supply chains more so being turned towards resilience instead of efficiency. And then you're seeing countries step away from the US dollar and treasuries as the primary reserve asset.
What do you think about the potential of this? Yeah, I think you talked about the BRICS nation, right? And the de-dollarization sort of. I mean, is that overhyped, do you think, or is that like something, a realistic scenario that could play out anytime soon?
I believe it's one of these things where the middle ground is probably true in that sense, meaning the people who are really harping on the de-dollarization narrative, and if they're saying it's going to happen quickly, that's probably too extreme. But then the other people who downplay it and say, oh, it's not happening at all, the US dollar is fine, it's entrenched, that's probably too extreme as well. So I think it is happening. China's probably the best example because in 2013, they came out publicly and made some statement that said it's no longer in China's interest to accumulate treasuries. And you can see that reflected in the data, meaning they haven't, and this is where it gets nuanced. And that's why I think the middle ground is important here, because it's not as if they made that statement and sold all their treasuries and never bought another treasury.
Yeah, but they've substantially reduced their holdings of treasury, right?
As a percentage of their total reserves, they have, but they still are buying some treasuries over time. And when you look at foreign countries and their buying of treasuries, it has maybe increased in nominal terms, but obviously the supply of treasuries has increased like crazy. And as a percentage of the total, the foreign ownership of treasuries has declined in recent years. Now, I do have to add one caveat here, is that some people speculate that China is buying treasuries through other entities. That makes the data a little hard to actually figure out. And, I'm not going to pretend I know if that's true, but I think it's, even with all that said, it's fair to say that other countries are realizing that they're not as excited and inclined to buy treasuries as they were, let's say, 20 years ago. I think that's a fair statement. And they're going to start looking for other assets, whether it's gold, whether it's other foreign currencies, whether it's a basket of currencies. Maybe it's going to be Bitcoin at some point. I do believe it's going to be Bitcoin at some point. So yeah, I think it's happening, but it's a trend that takes quite a while to play out. And then the other huge factor here is what happened with Russia. They got cut out of the financial system. They lost access to their treasuries. And again, on the one hand, you could say, well, they invaded a sovereign nation. That's what, people say on the one hand. But then on the other hand, you could say, well, as soon as the US and the West decide that you're an enemy of theirs, they just cut you out of the financial system. And any country is going to be at least a little bit worried about that happening to them. So they don't want to be too reliant on holding dollars and holding treasuries.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Let me just ask a final question about this tyrannical, dictatorial plan of introducing. Actually, they're working in the right digital ID and CBDCs, and as the president, whatever director of the Bank of International Settlements said, they want to have absolute control in their own words. So, in long term, my opinion is that this is actually good for Bitcoin, right? Because people are going to wake up and say, "Holy shit! They're programming my money. I have to spend it or a certain deadline. It's totally inflationary. And then you go, you're locked out of services. You can't fly, whatever. So, what do you think about? Is that good or in the long term or?
I think it is. This is a huge topic, by the way. Like this is a huge topic, of importance for individuals to think about. I think a lot of it's we're going to see this play out in the coming years and decades. My view is that it is a country by country thing. Unfortunately, I believe there will be some countries that will successfully implement a digital form of their currency. It'll be mass surveillance by their government. And maybe, for the first few years, they're not going to wildly abuse that. If the government is smart, they're not going to take a political dissident and just turn off his wallet because the citizens will say, hey, we don't like to see that. But unfortunately, it gives them the power to do that. And I think there will be some of these countries that don't really see that coming, and maybe it gets implemented. My hope as an American is that there's still enough people in America that would oppose this. And to your point earlier in the conversation, it doesn't have to be 95% of the population. There's this concept of an intransigent minority.
That's Corey's terminology.
Yeah, exactly. And there's so much precedent.
Did he put a percentage on that? Intransigent, what is it, like 5% or something like that? Or I don't remember, something like that. I think he put a percentage on that, but I'm not sure. Anyway.
Yeah, I will have to go back and look to see the percentage, but the point, as you made, is that it doesn't have to be 90%. It doesn't have to be 50%. So my hope in America is that we still have some of the principles that America was founded on: limited government. We have a Fourth Amendment, which is you can't have unreasonable search and seizure. If the government's going to come after looking for you, looking through your stuff, they have to have a good reason. A CBDC is directly in opposition for that. They're just surveilling everyone all the time. So I hope that America has there will be countries where it does not take hold, but I unfortunately believe that there will be countries where it just gets implemented and now they have to live with it.
All right. Do you think there's going to be a civil war? Global civil war? Seriously, I don't think World War III will happen. But I'm trying to keep my mind open and just have a realistic assessment of. Do you think there'll be real would they intentionally provoked or whatever or because people in America fed up, a certain percent intransigent minority just going to be fed up and say, hey, not with you're not fucking around with us.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And are you thinking specifically within America, or are you talking more globally?
I think America is going to lead, to be honest with you. United States has been leading to a lot of, it's a young country, but the people still have this spirit, this, that's the whole point, right, of United States. I hope it's not a corporation, I hope we have maybe going, but I don't know. There's so many, theories about that. But anyway, I do hope, that there's a minority or an intransigent minority or critical mass that will just inspire the rest of humanity. On the path.
I hope so too. I think you're right. The counter argument could be that, what you just said about America, and that being the whole point of America is this idea of limited government and more rights and freedom for the individual. You're absolutely correct. the counterpoint would be that there's unfortunately a huge percentage of Americans who are either unaware of that or they don't even agree with it anymore. So that is the part that scares me a bit.
Yeah.
But again, I still am optimistic because there is this intransigent minority. And I think there's enough people that understand why America was founded and the principles it was founded on. But it is scary times ahead because, and it's funny you asked this question because I was just chatting with a few of my friends about, there was some of this topic about, so in America, we have RFK Jr. is like a controversial politician right now running for president. And there was a story that came out that some podcaster he had an interview with RFK Jr. And then a advertiser called and said, "Hey, we don't like that. Take that episode."
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you see this? It was just making
sort
news.
of, "Hey, fuck off. I can put right something like that." Like,
yeah, basically. And then it was Peloton, and he was talking with Dana White, who's the head of UFC, the Ultimate Fighting Championship, and Dana White made the point. He said, "You know what? F Peloton. Get rid of the Pelotons that we own." And honestly, I'm way more in Dana White's camp on this topic. I'll just be honest. But if you keep playing this out, it might sound extreme, but I feel like there's only the logical outcome of that is some sort of civil war because the two groups are not cooperating. It's either got to be live and let live, and be more libertarian and open-minded and say, okay, we disagree, but you can do what you want and I'll do what I want. Or it's like this clash where it's just you're the enemy and I'm going to deplatform you and I'm going to censor you, and we have to separate because we can't live together because our differences are so great.
Yeah.
So it's hard to say which outcome we're going to get, but
secession,
right now,
maybe secession, Texas, Wyoming gonna secede. That would be great.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of different ways it could play out. I've read people who've argued that some sort of secession is actually a more peaceful outcome. When you start to think about, okay, how do you split up the military and the treasury and things like that? It gets very messy.
The big question: how is the military? Everybody who is in. I mean, are there? I don't know. Is there bad hats, white hats? What do you call them? Like how is the military going along with this? This is my big question. I mean, are they really patriots or adhering to the oath of the Constitution? This is a big question, I think. Or are they already, I don't know, just following orders?
Yeah.
But okay, I mean, that's a whole, new
loaded. You asked the big questions. I love it.
No, John, I really learned so much. It's fascinating discussion that we have and conversation. Where can people find you? Is anything you're working on currently? You want to, anything you want to, plug in?
Sure. So on Twitter, John_@_Swan. I'm glad I get to post a lot of content there since I've left Wall Street. When you're on Wall Street, you don't really get to tweet a lot. So that's been nice. LinkedIn as well. I think I'm going to be more active on LinkedIn because I want to get Bitcoin and sound money out to a more mainstream audience.
Yeah.
And then swan.com for Swan Bitcoin. I will just say it's been very cool to work at Swan and talk to so many people firsthand and have those conversations with people who are interested in Bitcoin. And we get a wide range. We get people who, literally they're just dipping their toe into Bitcoin for the first time and they want to talk about the fundamentals and ask all the questions. And then we get people who've actually been interested in Bitcoin for many years. And they just said, hey, I like the content Swan puts out. I heard you guys are trustworthy and I want to use you. So it's just been cool to see every week new people to get to talk to them firsthand who are making allocations to Bitcoin. So that's one of the many reasons that I'm bullish on Bitcoin is having those conversations firsthand with people.
Yeah. And, I mean, you have got, geniuses, I mean, brilliant minds like yourself. Like, I don't know, is Lynn Alden part of your team? Like, I just read several times, to be honest with you, Broken Money. It's a fascinating book. I mean, it's sort of a complementary book to, Safed on the Moose, Bitcoin standard, fiat standard, or the principles of what do you call the principles of Austrian economics? Or something like
Economics,
that.
yeah.
Yeah, it's fab. I mean, all these books, they complement each other. So yeah, it's awesome, to have people, writing articles for you guys, or
Yeah. Maybe last thing I'll plug is because you mentioned Lynn, and I think she's just hands down one of the best thinkers and writers out there. Thursday, 5 p.m. Eastern time, we're actually having a free webinar with Lynn. A lot of times we do kind of exclusive content for some of our private clients, but there are times where we open it up to a wider audience because we think it's good for Bitcoin and good for Bitcoiners. Yep. So if anyone wants to check that out, you should be able to go to the Swan handle on Twitter. You'll probably see many posts about it. Thursday, 5 p.m. Eastern, it'll be Lynn chatting with a few people from the Swan side. You'll get to hear her macro view, and you can register for free.
Awesome. Good to know. Well, John, it's been a pleasure and honor, and really inspirational. Learned a lot, not only me, but I'm sure my listeners and followers. And John, hopefully we can have another chat maybe in the near future sometime, maybe in a sort of a discussion forum. I'd love to have you and Jeff Bruce, maybe, who knows, in the near future, maybe in 6 months or so. I'll come back to you and ask you, maybe we can coordinate something.
That sounds great. Yeah, this was really fun. I got a lot of insightful stuff from you as well. And it's never a dull moment in the Bitcoin world. So, I'm sure 6 months from now, we'll have plenty more new things to talk about.
Awesome. Okay, John, take care. Talk to you soon.